For the best value in domain names, look no further than Namecheap, where you could get domains for as low as $3.98. Plus, get 1 year of WhoIsGuard privacy protection for free. For more information, check out the affiliate link in the description area below. Hey, welcome to another episode of GeekOutdoors.com. Quite often when we talk about Linux, we talk about how much of Linux is actually being used and how much it's continually growing. And in the latest 2017 Kernel Development Report, we actually get to see the actual numbers behind all of that. And so if you have not seen this report, this is from the official Linux Foundation Kernel Development Report, and I will leave that in the link area below. So let me go over some of the main stats from the report itself. So from the report, 90% of all the public cloud workload is actually running on a Linux kernel. 82% of all the smartphones are actually running on the kernel, and about 60% of all embedded systems run on the kernel, and then finally 99% of all supercomputers run on the Linux kernel. So that just goes to show you the magnitude of exposure that the actual kernel has. And other stats that are kind of mind-boggling is the amount of development work that's been going on there. So ever since Linux, the kernel was actually in the Git on 2005, there's been like 15,600 developers from more than 1,400 companies that's contributed to the kernel. And if you remember when Linux first came out, they actually had about 10,000 lines of code in 1991. And as of this year, it has almost 25 million lines of code. The number of changes being committed to the kernel are at about a rate of 8.5 per hour. So that's about 205 different changes to the kernel every single day. And so just from a technical point of view, that is absolutely amazing. And what's even more incredible is that all of this is being done through an open source community, and whenever we talk about open source, it doesn't just mean that, there's not money involved. Okay, that just means that the code is freely out there and open for other people to update and also to make additions to or take features off. And so there are a lot of companies who contribute to the kernel, and some of the top companies are companies you've heard of, such as Intel, which is the #1 contributor. Red Hat Linux is a huge contributor. There's of course companies like Google, Samsung, IBM, Facebook, and Microsoft contribute to the kernel as well. So there are many big players who develop to the kernel, and it makes sense because of what I just mentioned earlier. With all the statistics of how much the kernel is being used in so many different systems, it would actually be stupid for these companies not to be involved with Linux. And more, Linux is now more than ever a viable business option and also employment option for thousands and practically millions of people around the world because it is being used so heavily. And so with all of that being said, how it affects individuals is that more people who have Linux skills can actually find employment or start businesses through Linux, and I have mentioned this in a previous video where Red Hat Linux was one of the first companies to actually use Linux as a way to be profitable, as a way to run a business. And now it's kind of like standard now that Linux is something that companies, individuals must consider, not if they would consider, but they must consider whenever they want to use this for the long term. Okay, and it's in so many areas now. It's kind of like, like if you are a developer, right, and then you develop one piece of code, it would just be awesome for you to have a few thousand people who actually uses it. Okay, but in this case, Linus Torvalds, along with Richard Stallman's GNU portion, the GPL portion, they have created something that is simply in a magnitude I don't think that they could have ever predicted, especially Linus. I never would have thought, like when I'm developing code, or developing a YouTube video, just like I mentioned earlier, just a few thousand people would make me happy. But in this case, there are millions. And then if you think about how many people it affects, billions of people who are actually affected by this creation. And so, yeah. So if you ever think that Linux is not growing or it's being, I don't know, just something that is a fad, well, it's not. Okay, so if you are new to the Linux world, just know that Linux is not going anywhere. And if anything, it's going to be even more
prevalent, even more of a standard to your everyday computing needs. So if you had any thoughts on this, be sure to leave it in the comments area below. And if you do get a chance to read the report, I'd like to know your thoughts as well. And so as always, if you did get value out of these videos, leave a like and subscribe. And if you wanted to support my channel further, you could do that at patreon.com/Geek Outdoors.
Thanks for checking out this episode. And as always, if you like these videos, be sure to click on the subscribe button. And for full written content, audio content, and additional geek stuff, head over to geekoutdoors.com. And I'll see you outdoors on the very next episode.